45. Such were the words of exhortation by which the men's hearts were fired for battle on the two sides. The Romans then bridged the Ticinus and set a fort on its bank to protect the bridge. While his enemy was busy with the construction, the Carthaginians set Maharbal with a company of Numidian cavalry, 500 strong, to conduct raids on the farmland of the allies of the Roman people. Maharbal had orders to spare the Gauls as far as possible, and to induce their chieftains to defect. When the bridge was completed, the Roman army was marched across into the territory of the Isubres, where they encamped 5 miles from Victumali. It was at Victumali that Hannibal had his camp. He now swiftly recalled Maharbal and the cavalry, since he saw a battle was in prospect. Feeling that soldiers could never be given sufficient advice and encouragement to spur them on, he now called them to a meeting where he announced specific rewards that they could hope to win from combat. He would give them land in Italy, Africa, or Spain, he said, wherever an individual chose, and for the man receiving it and for his children it would be tax-free. To anyone preferring cash to land, he would give the full equivalent in silver. He would make it possible for allies wishing to become Carthaginian citizens to do so, and he would do his utmost to see that those wanting to return to their homes would not wish to change places with any of their compatriots. He also offered their freedom to slaves who had accompanied their masters, undertaking to give the masters 2 each in their place. Wishing the men to appreciate that these engagements were binding, he held a lamb in his left hand and a stone in his right, and made a prayer to Jupiter and the other gods that they should slay him, as he slew the lamb, if he broke his word. After the prayer, he smashed the animal's head with the stone. At this, each man felt the gods were smiling on his hopes, and they all thought that the fact that they were not yet fighting only delayed fulfillment of those hopes. With one heart and one voice, they clamored for battle. 46. There was nothing like as much enthusiasm amongst the Romans. Other concerns apart, they were also frightened by recent portents. A wolf had entered the camp, savaged the people it encountered, and escaped unharmed, and a swarm of bees had settled on a tree overlooking the general's headquarters. After rites to avert these omens, Scipio set off with his cavalry and light-armed javelin throwers to get a close look at the enemy camp, and at the size and make-up of his troops. In so doing, he came upon Hannibal, who had himself gone forth with his cavalry to reconnoitre the surrounding area. At first, neither party could see the other. Then the dust from so many men and horses on the move rose thicker, indicating the approach of the enemy. Both columns came to a halt and proceeded to prepare for battle. Scipio positioned his javelin throwers and Gallic cavalry in front, with the Roman and the cream of the allied cavalry in reserve. Hannibal set his bridled cavalry in the center and strengthened the wings of the Numidians. The battle cry had scarcely gone up when Scipio's javelin throwers ran back amidst the supporting troops to the second line. After that, there was a cavalry battle, which for some time remained even, but then the infantry became involved in the fighting, and this started the horses. Many riders were thrown from their mounts or climbed down on seeing their comrades surrounded and under pressure, and it had become mostly a battle fought on foot until the Numidians on the wings effected a slight encircling maneuver to appear to the rear of the Romans. At this, panic struck the Romans, and the panic was increased when the consul was wounded, the threat to his life averted only by the intervention of his son, who was at the time just coming to maturity. This was to be the young man who would have the distinction of terminating this war, and who would be called Africanus for his outstanding victory over Hannibal and the Carthaginians. The disordered fight, however, was mostly confined to the javelin throwers, whom the Numidians attacked first. The rest of the cavalry closed ranks and brought the consul into their midst, giving him protection with their own bodies as well as their arms, and taking him back to camp with no hint of panic or disorder in their retreat. Coelius assigns the glory of the consul's rescue to the slave of Ligurian nationality. I would rather accept the truth of the version concerning the son, an account passed down by several historians and entrenched in popular tradition. This was the 47. This was the first engagement with Hannibal, and it was patently obvious from it that the Carthaginians had cavalry superiority. It was also clear that, for this reason, the open plains of the kind between the Po and the Alps were not a suitable battleground for the Romans. Accordingly, the following night, Scipio ordered his men to pack up quietly, struck camp from the Ticinus, and marched swiftly to the Po. His intention was to take his army across by the pontoon bridge with which he had spanned the river, and which was not yet dismantled. He could thus avoid confusion and enemy harassment. They reached Placentia before Hannibal had definite word of their leaving the Ticinus, but the Carthaginian still captured some 600 who were too slow in unmooring a pontoon on his side of the river. He could not himself cross by the pontoon bridge since the end sections had been loosened and the whole structure was floating downstream. Coelius claims that Mago, his cavalry, and the Spanish infantry swam across immediately, but that Hannibal himself took the main body over by fording the Po upstream, with elephants positioned in a line to take the force of the current. Those who know the river would find it difficult to accept this. It is unlikely that the cavalry could have mastered such a strong current while still retaining their arms and horses, given if one assumes that all the Spaniards were floated over on inflated skins. And secondly, to seek out fords over the Po that would afford a crossing for an army weighed down with baggage would have meant a detour lasting several days. More credible, in my view, are the historians who record that it took a good 2 days to find a spot for spanning the river with a pontoon bridge, and that the cavalry and light-armed Spanish troops were sent over it first under Mago's leadership. Hannibal spent some time giving audiences to Gallic embassies before crossing the river. He then took the column of heavy-armed infantry across, and meanwhile Mago and the cavalry marched towards the enemy at Placentia, 1 day's journey from the river crossing. A few days later, Hannibal established a fortified camp 6 miles from Placentia, and the following day drew up his line of battle in full view of his enemy, offering them the opportunity to engage. 48. During the night that followed, there was a bloody coup in the Roman camp, pulled off by some Gallic auxiliaries, though the though the commotion was disproportionate to the actual damage. About 2,000 infantrymen and 200 cavalry killed the sentries at the gates and deserted to Hannibal. The Carthaginian welcomed him with kind words, filled them with expectations of rich rewards, and sent them off to their various communities to enlist the support of their compatriots. Scipio feared that the coup was a signal for wholesale insurrection by the Gauls, who, becoming infected by this villainous behavior, was now rushed to arms in a fit of madness. He was still in pain from his wound, but he nevertheless slipped quietly away towards the river Trebia with his army at the fourth watch of the following night, and proceeded to move his camp to a higher elevation where the hills would obstruct cavalry. His attempt at concealment was less successful than at the Ticinus. Hannibal sent the Numidians in pursuit first, and then the entire cavalry, and would certainly have created havoc, at least at the rear of the Roman column, had not greed for plunder sidetracked the Numidians to the now unmanned Roman camp. There they frittered away valuable time, rifling through every corner of the camp, without finding any prize worth the delay, and the enemy slipped through their fingers. The Numidians sighted the Romans only when they had already crossed the Trebia and were measuring off their camp. They did manage to kill a few of the stragglers, whom they cut off on the side of the river. Scipio could no longer bear the discomfort caused by the jolting of his wound on the march, and besides, he felt he should await his colleague, who, he had been told, had in fact already been recalled from Sicily. He therefore selected and fortified a spot near the river that seemed the safest location for a stationary camp. Hannibal dug in not far from there. Elated as he was by the victory of his cavalry, he was also worried by his lack of supplies. This was becoming more acute every day as he passed through enemy territory where no provision had been made for replenishment. He accordingly sent men to the village of Clastidium, where the Romans had stockpiled a large quantity of wheat. The Carthaginians were preparing an assault when the prospect of a sellout emerged. The price was not high. The garrison commander, Dacius of Brundisium, was bribed with 400 gold pieces, and Clastidium was handed over to Hannibal. The town became the granary of the Carthaginians while they remained at the Trebia, so that Hannibal could have reputation for clemency established right at the start. No harsh treatment was meted to the prisoners from the surrendered garrison.